let's say that very clearly.
Yeah.
If you are pregnant or looking to become pregnant, do not take vitamin A or other retinoid medications or supplements.
Exactly.
This is Generation Health. Each week we bring you the latest in news, cutting-edge research, and time-tested best practices, helping you live a longer, better life. Across from me, Mr. Dante DiMatteo, registered pharmacist, certified strength and conditioning specialist. What's up, my friend?
Nothing much. I think I have to renew that certified strength and conditioning specialist.
Uh-oh.
I got to check.
Is the clock ticking?
I think it is.
Dude.
Or else we'll be honest to the listeners.
It'd just be registered pharmacist, formerly certified strength and conditioning specialist, but still certified as of right now.
I think so.
So for this episode, anything you say in that area, it counts.
It's semi-reputable, I guess.
And behind the cameras you can't see, Mr. Josiah Schweinberg. How you doing, friend?
Doing good.
Excellent. Anything interesting or exciting? You still certified?
Certified data 4.
He's certified.
Very good.
Certified data 4.
Me too.
Doing my best.
Wow,
That's it.
But
Hey,
you guys.
we're trying to make sure that the earth doesn't become uninhabited.
That's right. Be fruitful and multiply. I don't know where I got that command.
That's a good idea.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. I think it was from an A$AP Rocky song.
How often do you have to renew? How often do you have to How often do you have to renew the strength and conditioning specialist?
I don't know.
Oh, you're going to look it
Let
up
me
right
look
now?
it up.
This is a professional show we've got going here.
So Heather's nursing
I think
license.
it's every 3 years.
Yeah, I was going to say Heather's nursing license. I think it's around every 2 years or 3 years, something like that.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, that's like mine is like a less,
It's not as
serious.
intense as a nursing.
Yeah, I think there's
license.
still like CEs involved in that kind of stuff, but like the pharmacy renewal license, nursing renewals, those are pretty intense. Like you got to do like 30, I have to do like 30 hours of CEs and then separate hours for immunization and then.
Jeez.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm glad.
Yeah.
I don't want somebody running around that got certified 50 years ago and he's still practicing pharmacology and hasn't done anything to update that knowledge base.
Yeah. Still practicing in hieroglyphics.
Back in my day. I'm your host, Tyler Andrews, and on today's show, we are going to talk about listener questions, specifically one about vitamin A and retin A. We're also going to talk, I'm so excited about this. We're going to talk about a scientifically proven healthy diet consisting exclusively of ultra-processed foods. Yes, that's a thing that just happened and your tax dollars paid for it. But first, we want to talk about some quick hits, some ideas, some things that are happening in the world of pharmacology that we're not going to spend a lot of time on. These are things we're just not going to talk about. We're going to read this and then we're going to move on. That's not true. But leprosy is on the rise. A new report from the CDC says that Hansen's disease, aka leprosy, cases have more than doubled in the last decade. There were 159 new cases reported in the U.S. in 2020 alone. And in the past, most cases of Hansen's disease originated outside of the United States. But this sharp increase is leading researchers to believe that Hansen's has become endemic or native to the U.S., particularly in Central Florida. That region accounts for nearly 20% of all cases reported nationally. But don't panic. Leprosy is not like what it was described as in the Bible, not anymore. My understanding is a simple round of antibiotics or maybe extended round of antibiotics takes care of it. It's totally curable, not the end of the world.
Yeah.
So that's good news on that front. But still, we have to ask Florida, what are you doing?
Was the Bible talking about leprosy in that way? Like, was it the same?
I have no idea.
I didn't know if you guys knew. Josiah, do you know?
I don't, just because I don't know like what current day leprosy would be considered versus. So
it's like so symptoms include discolored, flat patches of skin, growths on the skin.
Yeah.
Yeah, so then it would be the same.
stiff.
Yeah, it's
so
the
that's
same
how
thing.
they described it.
Yeah.
In scripture.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was very contagious.
Wasn't there like the other meaning to it though?
I don't
Was
know.
there like another meaning to it? Maybe not. I don't know these things.
No, I
as
think
well.
it was the same thing. I think it's just that it never gets to that stage now because nowadays if somebody notices a massive discoloration or strange growth, most normal people go to a doctor to find out what the heck is going on, but there was no solution. There were no antibiotics back then. So
Yeah, I think the deeper meaning that you may be getting at is just the whole idea of like unclean.
Right.
So
right.
like lepers are unclean. They'd have to shout out unclean, unclean. They were moved to the outskirts of the city, outcast, ostracized.
right.
And then like the deeper meaning is maybe just the unclean spirit, which is often referred to. So maybe that's
Yeah.
indeed.
All right. Drug shortages continue to plague the U.S., reaching near record levels. A new survey of pharmacists in the healthcare systems is making the consequences of those shortages even clearer. It was a survey of pharmacists working primarily in hospitals in healthcare systems across the U.S., but 99% of those pharmacists surveyed said that drug shortages are something they are experiencing. And in those top 5 drugs that are missing, chemotherapy drugs are up there, with 57% of pharmacists saying that they are critically impactful, quote, critically impactful with direct effects on patient care. In addition to delaying or canceling some treatments, 85% of pharmacists said they've rationed drugs, and 97% said they have had to change to a therapeutic alternative because of these shortages. Those are crazy numbers. Dante, are you seeing this as well?
Yes.
You're part of the 99%, huh?
Yes.
Ugh.
I mean, fortunately, we're not dispensing chemotherapeutic agents for the most part.
Right.
That's rough. That's a rough one to hear.
Yeah, that's really, really, really problematic.
Yeah. And not that the Adderall shortages and the GLP-1 shortages, not that those aren't serious too.
Right.
It's just when you logically think about somebody potentially being late to their
Yeah.
chemo, quote unquote.
Having to delay chemotherapy is a really big deal.
Mm-hmm.
Man, oh man.
Yeah. But no, we see a lot of it. We have to navigate. It's tough. You know, we have to navigate it in a weird way because, you know, you're talking to a customer, you're talking to a patient, and you can't explain to them what what policies are going into place to prevent this for the future. And
Sure.
there's steps being taken because that's not going to get somebody 30 days of their medication
Right.
or whatever. It's not going to get them 90 days of something they were accustomed to getting 90 days worth of. So it is a tough conversation, but it's like it changes the cash flow for a pharmacy even.
Sure.
You're having to try and order things ahead of time
Yeah.
in the event that, okay, we're seeing a spike in the usage of this. And so we want to make sure, since we have a lot of people on it, that now we got to create almost a stockpile of certain things. It's weird. And so I think there's a trickle effect with a lot of that, but I assume that that's not the main problem necessarily, is that these like spikes in demand, they certainly contribute.
Yeah.
But it's like the industry related problems that I think have been insidious.
I remember reading
know?
somewhere that there were ongoing issues with getting raw chemicals necessary to produce the drugs, that was one of the major issues. Mm-hmm. Is
that's definitely
accurate?
part of it.
Okay.
Yeah. And then I think a lot of it has to do with, maybe just like a retail pharmacy has to function as a business.
Yeah.
These manufacturing facilities have to function as a business, and they have to allocate their resources to the medications and to the active ingredients and sourcing them and such to the ones that are more profitable.
Yeah.
And so there are medications going on shortage that are almost surprising because it's they've been around for so long, but maybe it's because of this underlying decrease in resources put towards something that, it's not a driver for us. So if we,
right.
Once we hit our capacity, sorry.
Yeah.
So I think that there's policy, with Congress and with working with the FDA to help maybe prevent some of that. I don't know if I pulled up a policy solution sheet from the ASHP, and they talked a lot about these different things. And for example, it's like you hear these big fancy changes: enforce existing shortage prevention requirements. So that's saying that things that were in place are not being really followed to a T by the manufacturing companies.
Yeah.
improve transparency into manufacturer quality. There's issues with a medication getting recalled because they failed a standard that was overlooked for a while. And so that disrupts the chain of work. Encourage new manufacturers and new manufacturing sites. So how does something like that happen overnight?
Yeah,
it doesn't. It's maybe in 5 or 10 years, this problem is less prevalent. But again, how do you explain that to Mrs. Smith, that's used to getting her blood pressure medication with no issue?
Right.
Before?
She didn't change, so why is everything else changing?
Right.
Wow.
Can I just add something real quick?
No.
Definitely not.
Honestly?
No.
Well, so Dante, you said like maybe in 5 or 10 years, this would be different. So in this same article, it says, so right now, 309 active drug shortages, second quarter of the year. But then they say this is the most there have been in nearly a decade, topped only by the third quarter of 2014, when there were 320 active shortages. So like what changed from 2014 till now? Like how'd they make those shortages? Like how did they meet those demands? And can we just fix those? I understand there's probably a lot more
nuance.
Yes, and involved, but if it's a decade since we've had something like this, so I guess it would be 10 years from now, but it's happened before, so we can get out of the shortage again. I don't know.
Yeah. It's not that this excuse is going away by any stretch, or not that it wasn't a good excuse, but the changes that COVID brought about, I think, it's like you heard about the supply chain issues. My goodness, like the most generic way to talk about this. Like, supply chain, it's affected everything. Just
the fact that anybody knows what a supply chain is at this point is just evidence of how much it was disrupted.
Right. Yeah. Anybody is talking about the supply chain.
Yeah.
I might get a chain.
Just a supply
just
chain.
A supply on it. But in all seriousness, you're right. It is certainly possible to get back to where it was. And I think that's what this ASHP overview was essentially talking about. It's like, okay, we have these things in place. We need to go back to making sure that we're holding manufacturers to the same standards.
Yeah.
So that's one step. But now there are new problems. I don't know. You can't really do much with tornadoes and wildfires. There's those sorts of things.
Global pandemics.
Right. So it's just been this, I think it's just been a trickle down effect, across the board. Yeah. I would like to dig into that a little more. But
all right. So our first question this week is from Dante's neighbor. So if you're Dante's neighbor, you get to ask questions face to face, and you don't have to email us questions at questions@askjoedimatteo.com. But since most people aren't your neighbor, they have to email us. But that's not true for this one. This one is a face-to-face question. Not sure if you'll know the answer to this question. Might be more something I should ask my doctor, but I'll give it a shot. Can I take a supplement with vitamin A in it? 5,000, 1,500 micrograms. Is that right? MCG micrograms?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. I don't know what I'm talking about. While also using topical retin A. I went down a Google rabbit hole about liver toxicity. I have no idea what any of this is about, so this all sounds very silly and funny to me. Why is this a big deal? What is vitamin A useful for?
Vitamin A, so orally, it plays a role in the immune system, vision, bone and cartilage development. It's implicated in some observational studies with a role in maybe lung cancer, prostate cancer, cognitive decline. It's found in some of those memory.
Yeah.
Different forms of vitamin A are found in some of those, popular memory products.
Yeah.
Age-related macular degeneration, again, a major role in vision issues. But topically speaking, it does treat a variety of, skin issues, whether that's acne or
vitamin A does?
Vitamin A, certain forms of vitamin A.
Is retin A related to vitamin A?
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah, so vitamin A, so to kind of square the circle with terminology, so vitamin A is synonymous with retinol, technically.
Oh.
And so that's where the retin A is just the trade name for tretinoin, which is the technical name, which is a retinoid.
Okay.
And so it's just these
Yeah.
classifications. Now, as far as the vitamin A, again, which is synonymous with retinol, it comes from our diet in two forms. And so preformed A is the retinol portion, which is the more potentially toxic version that you want to watch out for.
Okay.
And then provitamin A refers to carotenoids.
Okay, so like carrots.
Carrots.
That's it. That's the answer, right? No, come on.
Yeah. So both of those things are stored in the liver.
Okay.
And so her question, basically, she found somewhere, when you start to research vitamin A, punch some things into Google, quickly you see, again, like she mentioned, liver toxicity. There's issues with pregnancy and different pregnancy category classifications. And
Wow.
So it is something that heightens the ability to raise a red flag.
Okay.
So,
Liver toxicity sounds really, really bad. What is it specifically? What does that look like? What does that cause in a person? How would they know that's what's going on?
yeah. So acutely, whether it's accidental ingestion or in her case, she was, taking supplemental vitamin A in the retinol form and the preformed source of vitamin A, that over time you start to accumulate this fat soluble vitamin.
Oh, it builds up.
Yes. And so it's hard to even tell looking at, from what I understand, it's hard to tell even just looking at somebody's blood work that there's an acute situation or a chronic situation of vitamin A toxicity. It's like, so you can only kind of recognize what's happening potentially based on reports you get from the individual or some of these non-specific clinical aspects. So
Sure.
you have nausea and vomiting, headache, increased intracranial pressure, which is pretty serious.
Yeah.
More chronic changes would be changes in your hair, skin, nails. We mentioned liver issues, abnormal liver test results. And then again, something we'll get to is the effects on the fetus.
Yeah.
If you're pregnant, so that's where in my opinion, that's where the major issue is. If you are pregnant or you're looking to get pregnant, even the topical forms you would ultimately want to avoid.
Okay, so let's say that very clearly.
Yeah.
If you are pregnant or looking to become pregnant, do not take vitamin A or other retinoid medications or supplements.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And so there were in vitro studies years ago that showed that even the topical forms that you were using, there can be some potential issues with that accumulating in the blood. Even though it was a topical form, it has to do even with the amount of surface area that you're applying it to.
Sure.
There are a lot of factors. A lot of the more recent research suggests that maybe it's not that it was completely overblown, but that you have some wiggle room.
Yeah.
There's just different factors affecting absorption. There's really not going to be that much absorption. But in something like pregnancy, you don't even want to touch this with a 10-foot pole, basically. Right. And I get that.
Until we know that it's totally safe.
Yeah, it's not
worth it.
Yeah. And so that's why tretinoin and differin, they're categorized as category C. Tazarac is considered category X. And so these are the big ones, again, that you would, your doctor would obviously know to not recommend and, would be flagged at your pharmacy and that sort of thing. So I think this is a good way to say that in her case, I answered her question much more simply than this, that she's probably not absorbing a meaningful amount. So she doesn't really have to worry. She just started taking the oral supplement for, whatever reason that she's found. And I feel, given that she's beyond wanting to conceive, anything like that, that it was not a concern. But I think if you're talking to somebody or you have the feeling that they, are pregnant or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. For somebody who could become pregnant or is in that childbearing age, be aware of that if this is something you're looking into. All right. And I just have to make a side point. the part of the question that said, is this not even sure that this is a question that you can answer? Isn't that exactly what this sort of thing is? Like, you're supposed to be able to answer these questions as a pharmacist, right?
Yeah.
Like, in a philosophical sense, your role as a pharmacist is to know that, hey, if you're going to be pregnant or become pregnant, this is not something you should take.
Right.
That's the point of the training, right?
Mm-hmm. And at least it's kind of like we know where to look potentially.
Right.
And honestly, these are good questions for poison control.
Yeah.
You know, that's what they're there for. They have pharmacists that work there. If you're in pharmacy school, you can go to a place like that for clinical rotation. So you're exactly right. Fundamentally, this is what the skill set, this is part of the skill set that's developed.
Right.
Definitely. At least understanding where to look and what to take serious and what to also, kind of take not so serious.
Yeah. So feel free to ask your pharmacist, or better still, email us questions@askjoedimatteo.com. That's what we do. All right. Man, I've been looking forward to this ever since I found this article. I got this article directly from the FDA website. Scientists build a healthy dietary pattern using ultra-processed foods. Scientists at the USDA Agricultural Research Services, ARS, Grand Forks Human Nutrition Research Center led a study that demonstrates it is possible to build a healthy diet with 91% of the calories coming from ultra-processed foods as classified using the NOVA scale, while still following the recommendations from the 2020-2025 Dietary Guidelines for Americans. The study highlights the versatility of using those guideline recommendations in constructing healthy menus. Quote, "The study is a proof of concept that shows a more balanced view of healthy eating patterns where using ultra-processed foods can be an option," unquote, said ARS research nutritionist Julie Hess at the Grand Forks Human Nutrition Research Center. Quote, "According to current dietary recommendations, the nutrient content of a food and its place in a food group are more important than the extent to which a food was processed," unquote. Some of the ultra-processed foods used in this menu include canned beans, instant oatmeal, ultra-filtered milk, whole wheat bread, and dried fruit. Quote, "We used the Healthy Eating Index to assess the quality of the diet as it aligns with key DGA recommendations. The menu we developed scored 86 out of 100 points on the Healthy Eating Index of 2015, meeting most of the thresholds except for sodium content, which it exceeded recommendations, and whole grains, in which it was slightly deficient." Okay, I'm sorry. First of all, that's my tax dollars at work. We put money into doing this research to see if it was possible to create a healthy diet out of 91% ultra-processed foods. So let's just put that aside. I can't think of anywhere that money could have gone to better use. What's going on here? Is this the foods they mentioned, canned beans? That doesn't sound like an ultra-processed food to me. It seems like they're playing a little fast and loose with that definition.
That, to me, is the bigger issue with this, is that, it's nothing against the NOVA classification.
Right.
But when you have a classification system like this, that's what I feel like was the take-home message of a study like this.
Yeah.
To prove that kind of drawing these lines in the sand between classifications, as useful as they are as just a tool,
right,
it can cause some disagreement. Well, is this can of beans worse than this protein powder?
Right.
That's also technically ultra processed.
Right.
So you just have these food products, they're in a classification because it's in group 3 or group 4, it's automatic. It has to be automatically bad. Right. So I think it just challenges, again, something that maybe I'm guilty of viewing as sort of black and white, ultra processed. We got to eat all food that are not processed at all.
Yeah. Raw foods.
Right. So I think it challenges that way of thinking, at least for me, because a lot of these lines in the sand are sort of arbitrary. And I think it's almost like a waste of time sometimes to argue those sorts of things when looking at somebody's overall dietary pattern.
Okay, so if I understand you, you're saying some of this delineation, some of these lines in the sand are arbitrary, and the definition, if you're sticking to a strict definition, things that we would commonly think of as not being ultra processed are technically ultra processed, and therefore you can't just blanket say ultra processed foods are bad, that there are plenty of exceptions to that rule, enough so that you can build a healthy, balanced diet out of it.
Yeah.
Okay. That being said, when most people, I'll be the one here. When I think of ultra processed foods, I'm thinking Cheese Whiz. I'm thinking, crazy ice cream derivative things. I'm thinking, macaroni and cheese that comes in a blue box. It tastes amazing. It's better when it's Velveeta cheese. I'm going to a lot of cheese examples here because that's my favorite ultra processed food.
Cheesy, man.
Yeah. That's what I think of. Frozen dinners,
Oh man.
And
the hungry man.
Yes, exactly. And you're saying yes, those are ultra processed, but that's not the only thing that's ultra processed, technically.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So yeah, part of it is understanding what exactly is in what category, So right. In your case and in most people, you're assuming it's just those sort of things. The hyper sweet, hyper palatable.
Right.
Added fat, added sugar, all of those sorts of things.
Yeah.
That when really there are things, microwavable meals, certain chicken patties or certain canned foods, certain frozen other fruits or vegetables.
Right.
Those can almost make their way into those categories. And so
like pre-cut frozen, mixed vegetables might qualify as being ultra processed.
Yes.
But I don't think anybody would argue that frozen vegetables are, just as unhealthy as shells and cheese.
I mean, I saw that they incorporated things like raisins, other dried fruits, which, there is more sugar per serving for the most part of those items versus a, raw piece of fruit.
Yeah.
But ultimately, this kind of challenged the way I think about things.
Okay.
And, it really has. I don't know. It's because we talk so much about ultra processed foods, trying to, maintain a dietary pattern that is minimally low in ultra processed foods and all those sorts of things. But to slap blanket labels on a diet as bad or good, or almost force somebody into worrying too much about that stuff, instead of looking at each food and each thing that you select on a case by case basis. I mean, I eat oatmeal pretty much every day. I think frozen meals play a role. I think anything that's not adding a ton of saturated fat is an option. Things that don't add a ton of extra sugar, those are an option. But yeah, it's just further proof that the categorization is often the problem.
Yeah, you can't just draw a line and say, well, it's not in that category, therefore it's okay.
So I've been reading this article, and it's hard for me to quite wrap my mind around what they're saying, because they're still having a tough time defining what are ultra processed foods.
Right.
And so they're adding some things they say are graders, so they have people who grade which foods are ultra processed. They're not considering this an ultra processed food. Okay. So they didn't end up on our menu: almond butter, pork loin, soy milk, cottage cheese. So I think they're still defining what this is. And so it's just very to your point, Tyler, to throw a headline out there like that leads people to believe, well, if this is no big deal, then I'll just continue. But I think that if people are buying ultra processed foods because they're readily available, convenient, they're cheaper, all of those things, they're probably also not too concerned about the nutrient factors of that, and they're not going to read into this article anyway.
Right.
So like
They're just going to see the headline.
correct. So and then that'll justify what they want to hear anyway. So if the menu scored 86 out of 100 points on the healthy eating index, it says by comparison, the average American diet scores just 59.
Yeah.
So it's like it's already bad, I guess, 59%.
But I mean, I think the point is, if you actually pay attention to what you're eating and what's in the things you're eating, you can get a healthier diet just about anywhere.
Correct.
But the point is you have to pay attention. This took a team of scientists actually focusing and working to try and make this magic happen. Is there any reason that you can think of that we wouldn't want to just focus on eating less processed foods like fresh fruits and vegetables that you cook yourself, or fresh meat that you are cooking yourself, or, if you want to get canned beans as opposed to getting dried beans that you then rehydrate yourself, that's not the end of the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's kind of the idea here. But paying attention to what's actually in your food
right
is probably more important than freaking out about the processing level of it.
I agree. I think this is just another classic example of there's so many ways, just given the food environment, there's so many ways to make it work. On the flip side, you look at this and like Josiah said, 59, it was a score of 59?
The average American diet
59,
is 59 out of 100.
I mean, and that's considered, it's made up of a decent amount of minimally processed foods or non-processed foods, and they still, based upon the DGA, the dietary guideline, they're still falling short on the big picture.
Yeah.
Most people don't have no idea what the dietary guideline says.
Right.
So like you're saying, there's a huge gap between understanding what's in the food, and then you just assume, well, nobody's following these guidelines anyway, so these guidelines must stink.
Yeah.
Well, really, the guidelines are pretty decent.
Yeah.
I mean,
To the best of our knowledge,
it's not a guideline problem.
Yeah.
It's a practical problem. It's an implication problem, And so in support of an article like this, it's just the idea that we have just constructs for everything. Like we kind of just have all these subsets of things. And so bad foods and good foods. And this is just proof that with the bad foods that we've even been touting as bad foods, that you can still make it work. I look at an elementary school's food menu, for example.
right.
And there are things on there that you would look at a glance and say, well, that's got to be minimally processed. And guess what? For the most part, what they're offering, in order for them to, receive some sort of financial incentive, they have to follow strict dietary guidelines.
Right.
And it's not the prettiest or it's not the freshest fruit. And it might be a frozen this, and they may have added some sodium here and certain things, but they're still meeting the guidelines. And even what we talked about on a prior episode with how hard it is for individuals to pack their lunch for their kids, let's say, to take that upon yourself to pack and have a similar nutrition profile as to what's provided at the schools. It's like you would think, so-and-so shopping on their own, knowing that they need to buy minimally processed foods, that it'll definitely be better than what's given in the schools because it's processed foods and they have availability to these sorts of things.
Right.
When really, from a macronutrient perspective, like this paper saying, it's just as good.
Yeah.
From a micronutrient perspective, other than a few certain things that are added, it's pretty good. And so again, it just boils down to foods need to be looked at case by case, and we, instead of worrying about the classifications, it's that is somebody's overall dietary pattern really high in saturated fat?
Yep.
Maybe that's a problem.
Yep.
Is their pattern very low in fibrous fruits and vegetables? Well, maybe that's something to look at. You can add some of those things from dried fruit.
Right.
That's a possibility. If somebody refuses to eat or go and buy fresh fruit, that's an option. That's a processed food, But
I had a son that would not eat any fresh fruit at all, but he would eat dried cranberries. So for a couple of years, that was his only source of any sort of fruit or vegetable was that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's so many ways to make it work. And I think the further away you get from all ultra processed foods are bad. All of this category of foods is bad. I think it opens the door to a more sustainable approach because you're never going to be able to avoid certain things.
Right.
You're never going to be able to go to a social event and have all minimally processed foods. You're never going to be able to have, what are you supposed to do?
Yeah.
There has to be ways to equip yourself with the understanding of what's in given foods, and then.
So the point is pay attention to what you're eating and do your best to keep it broad and varieties and all that jazz, right?
Mm-hmm.
So here's a quote I think perfectly sums up this whole conversation.
Yeah.
Dr. Bonacio, I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right. Quote, in light of this, a work exclusively focused on the nutritional quality of ultra-processed food, which of course could be also adequate in some cases, in my opinion, is completely misleading. So it could be adequate for you to be working in some of this, ultra-processed food into your diet, but the headline of this article is completely misleading, or a work focused on this could be completely misleading.
Yeah. Just because there's so many people don't understand exactly what the definition is and what's being considered here. That's interesting, man. I know that since I've been tracking what I eat, I am constantly fascinated when I look back and go, yeah, that was a good week. I did well that week. And then I look and I'm like, whoa, how much saturated fat did I have?
Mm-hmm.
It's enlightening, and I encourage everyone to take the time to start tracking your food, at least for a while, to get some idea of what you're doing and what you think are healthy habits, but maybe not quite.
I would fall into that category 100%.
Dude,
I feel like I don't track my food, so just confession time.
do it for a while. It's fascinating.
I'm like, I just eat salads,
Yeah.
some fruit, some cashews. Heather's like, you probably shouldn't just stand there and eat handfuls of cashews in one sitting.
Do you? No kidding. I get the raw pecans at my local big box retailer. Raw pecans. They're no salt added, nothing like that. Those jokers, one handful is something like 250 calories just by itself, and I'll sit there and eat 3-4 handfuls, no problem. So when I started measuring my food and doing that, it was very eye-opening.
Yeah. Yeah, I wish there was a way to implement tracking for people in some way that wouldn't be, for some people that can immediately become disordered and obsessive and is really like a top of the pyramid sort of thing. I mean, that's a going from basically, for example, if you're going from not even knowing if the frozen meal you just ate was processed, minimally processed, healthy, not healthy.
Right.
If you had no idea and you were just eating based upon whatever knowledge you had prior, going to a position of tracking your food with a scale, with measuring devices, doing your own grocery shopping, taking the time to cook it. I mean, you think about all those things. That is such a massive intervention.
Is. Yeah.
That it's something that I think about often. How do you get somebody to embark on that journey, right? Of whatever it is. Like, how do you get somebody to figure out on their own that there's X amount of calories and there's X amount of fat in that vat of cashews that you just ate, or in that salad dressing that you put on, but you assumed it was a salad and it was healthy.
Yeah.
And boom, you added 200, 300, 400 calories without understanding. So how can you instill people with that, with their own motivation? It's like, you got to come to that conclusion yourself that I'm going to look a little deeper in what I'm buying and how I'm preparing it. And all these, it's so many things that I'm still learning to this day, trying to figure out.
I mean, that's part of what we're doing here is
know?
trying to encourage people to do that because it is worth it. It is enlightening and it makes your life better when you know these things because you can make better decisions.
Right.
But the story I always think of is, I don't remember who told me this, but it's two good old boys sitting on a porch. And there's a dog laying there and he's whining. And the one who was the visitor said, "Why is your dog whining?" And the owner said, "Well, that spot he's laying on the porch, there's a nail sticking up. He's laying on it." And the other one said, "Well, why doesn't he move?" And the owner said, "Well, I guess it just doesn't hurt enough yet." I think there are so many situations in life that just don't hurt enough yet. And not that we want to turn up people's pain point, but maybe turn down their threshold of tolerance and go, you shouldn't just tolerate this. You should take some action and change. Just get up and move. Get off that nail that's sticking through the porch. Deep Thoughts with Tyler Andrews. You sure you want to do a philosophy episode?
That's pretty good. That is pretty good. But to even Josiah's point and to your point about the headline being misleading in general. I mean, there's some really thoughtful articles that can lead you down a path of saying, okay, you know what? Forget the headline. I can see this for what it is. I can see all sides. It's not the end of the world. But if you're just, clicking through a major news site and you see this pop up, if you're sitting on the nail, so to speak, you just say, I'm just going to stay here because whatever, that doesn't affect me or whatever. But instead, if you look at it as, I can start to make changes knowing that not all of these you hear process now and it's the end of the world.
Right.
You can make good choices. You can make changes and be somewhere in the middle.
Well,
you know what I mean?
If you pay attention,
it can be affordable. It can be, it can taste pretty good.
Yeah.
And it can have a decent macronutrient, profile. And you didn't have to spend 3 hours cooking it, going to the store to pick it up and worrying about all these sorts of things that would be a big step for you.
Yeah.
There's ways to do that.
Well, and not to mention, if you are paying attention, you can enjoy some of those things guilt-free.
Yeah.
Like if a certain producer brought donuts to the video shoot. You're welcome.
And I like that you mentioned that too. That is the problem with processed foods. And that's what's in the literature. That's what we see time and time again is that again, there's a place for donuts. There's a place for ice cream. There's a place for Klondike bars. There's a place, Cheese Whiz. There's a place for all that stuff. But in general, those are the sorts of things that for the vast majority make it hard to then to portion control.
Yeah.
And they're too good. They're too hard to stop eating. And granted, there's environmental factors and genetic factors and brain factors.
Yeah, biochemistry is playing a role.
Yes. And so every person's going to respond differently to the donuts on the counter.
Right.
But again, just speaking broadly, the less of those that are in your environment, the better.
Yeah.
And there then is the room for the frozen meals and the canned things and the convenience type things that modern living has afforded us, but if you just live in a world of all the donuts and all the Klondikes, that it's just I feel like it's an uphill battle to not overconsume those things.
Absolutely.
That's the point, is overconsumption that kind of gets out of your control. It's natural to overeat those things.
Yeah.
That sounds like a world that I could live in.
Yeah.
No, Josiah, bad.
Donuts, Klondikes.
Stop it.
Boy.
We're trying to encourage people to be healthy.
I know.
We're going to have an intervention. Next week's episode,
Gosh.
intervention for Josiah.
Oh, my goodness.
Well, if you've got a question, we want to hear about it. Questions at askjoedimatteo.com. All of the products that we mentioned are available on our website, that being askjoedimatteo.com, askjoedimatteo.com, askjoedimatteo.com. That's also where you can sign up for the email newsletter, find out about different things going on sale. You can find past episodes of this show. You can find past episodes of the show that started all of this, the Ask Joe DiMatteo show. If you want to read any of the show notes, they will have all of the articles we referenced located in them. They're down in the description. And if you learned something from this episode, or if you have some thoughts that you'd like to contribute, because obviously this is a big conversation, we want to hear about it. leave a comment, whether you're watching on YouTube or Rumble, give it a thumbs up, subscribe. Obviously, we love all that stuff, but leave a comment. We try to engage in dialogue. Same thing with iTunes, 5-star review, leave a review. Those written reviews really help people find this, but most of all, share it with somebody that you like and love and think would benefit from listening to this. That's it for us this week. Big thanks, as always, to Josiah Schweinberg, back behind the cameras over there, keeping us looking good. Michael Deppish, our editor. Joyce Gibb, our nurse practitioner, who handles private consultations. Diane Silverman manages our product. Terry does scheduling. Cecilia does distribution. That's Dante DiMatteo. I'm Tyler Andrews. Thanks so much, guys. We'll see you next week.